There's a problem at the root of all science, a crack in the foundation. It permeates through every claim, prediction, and theory. It has been called the glory of science and the scandal of philosophy. Most who have written about it consider it fundamentally unsolvable. It is called the problem of induction. Attributed to David Hume, the problem of induction makes a simple claim. Scientific predictions rely on inductive logic. Inductive logic doesn't guarantee its predictions. Therefore, scientific predictions are inherently unreliable. You are probably familiar with deductive logic, aka arguments of the form, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. For these arguments, if the premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows. Inductive logic is a bit different. This kind of logic takes the following form. I've repeatedly seen the pattern of A followed by B. Therefore, I infer that if I see A, B will probably follow. The problem with inductive logic is that it's essentially a guess. It's an inference based on the idea that the pattern will repeat, that the future will in some way resemble the past. Here's a less abstract example of an inductive argument. It rained yesterday, it rained today, therefore it will probably rain tomorrow. If all you knew about the weather is that it rained yesterday and that it rained today, you might be inclined to think that it's fairly reasonable to think that it might rain again tomorrow. But you'd know that the rain wasn't guaranteed. Now let's try another example that is more in alignment with our expectations or intuitions about how the world works. For example, the laws of physics have been the same in every place we've ever tested them. Therefore, the laws of physics are the same everywhere. Here we kind of have a spatial induction. Currently, our best understanding of what space fundamentally is comes from Einstein's theory of general relativity, which assumes that, barring singularities, space and time conform to uniform laws everywhere. That is to say, the assumption of universality is built into how we typically apply physics, even with our best theory, even though, of course, there's nothing to stop someone from coming up with a theory that asserts that there are different laws in different places. However, in terms of experimental validation, we've obviously not been everywhere, nor have we been everywhen. Let's take another example that illustrates a time induction. We have always measured the speed of light to be the same. Therefore, the speed of light is a constant. It does not change over time. While we have tested this, it's also something we assume. You've heard of E equals mc squared. This is special relativity. Einstein derived this equation by assuming that the two-way speed of light is constant in all frames of reference. Alongside the speed of light, there are a collection of physical constants which, whenever we've measured them, have always had the same value within the error ranges of the various experiments. But who is to say that, come tomorrow, a constant might, well, not be constant? We've only been doing science in its modern form for a few hundred years. Could things change? How do we know they won't? Richard Feynman once likened discovering the laws of physics to learning how to play a game of chess, except you don't get to read the rulebook, you only get to watch. Perhaps on the first few games you observe some consistencies, how pawns can jump 2 spaces on their first move, or how the knight can hop over other pieces in a sort of L-shaped pattern, that the bishop can move on a diagonal, and so on. Perhaps by game 10, you're fairly confident you know the laws of chess. But then, in game 11, you see someone pull the castle move. 2 pieces of the same colour move in a single turn. The king swaps with a rook. You might watch this and go, that's against the rules of chess. Only 1 piece is allowed to move per turn. But of course, it's totally in keeping with the rules of the game. You just hadn't encountered it yet. And perhaps at a certain point you realise something worse. You realise you've not even been seeing the whole board. Maybe you've only been watching a particular corner of the board, and there's more space that you just haven't encountered yet. We could go even further with this analogy. Suppose that the rules of chess were such that if a total of 40 moves had been made with no winner or draw declared, the board shrank, or expanded, or some other dramatic change which had no indication prior took place. We can imagine a version of chess that demands a sacrifice of a piece every 10 moves past a certain number, or any other interesting mechanism. You get the idea. This is why the problem of induction is a problem. Put simply, science, arguably, uses past evidence to inform our future predictions. If we don't have access to all the evidence that we will have in the future, which, given we are time-bounded beings, we do not, then surely there has to be some level of guesswork to the patterns we describe. We don't know what we don't know. Some questions arise from this problem, the main one being, how can we trust scientific predictions? If science is based on inductive logic, and inductive logic is weaker than its deductive counterpart, why should we trust that things will work tomorrow as they do today? Why should we trust that planes will fly, that medicine will work, that the sun will shine? You might say, Well, because these things are consistent. But that in itself is using inductive logic. They've been consistent before, therefore they'll be consistent again, is another inductive argument, and those are only probably right. The general consensus among the philosophical community, as far as I'm aware, is that the problem of induction is indeed a problem, namely that science does use inductive reasoning. However, some philosophers, most notably Karl Popper, believe that induction wasn't a problem, because, according to him, induction isn't necessary for science at all. He rejected induction outright. Popper argued that science advances not by confirming theories inductively, but rather by proposing hypotheses and attempting to falsify them deductively. Put another way, there's an epistemological asymmetry when it comes to confirmation and falsification. Hypothetically, in order to prove, say, Einstein's theory of general relativity is true, one would need to test gravity everywhere, in all places, at all times. But to disprove it, you only really need one concrete example of the theory failing to describe what's going on to prove that it's not completely true.
Chris Angel did it better. You're not even levitating, Evan! What?
I'm levitating.
What the F?
Popper's approach to science uses evidence not as a confidence booster, but as a confidence killer, disproving bad ideas, leaving us only with ideas that haven't yet been disproven. If an idea hasn't yet been disproven, then at the very least we know that it isn't outright wrong or as wrong as the others, which is more than what we can say for the alternatives. Thus, according to Popper, we can trust it. It's more reliable than the defunct ideas we chucked out. This sounds great. However, Popper's approach doesn't guarantee scientific predictions with any kind of certainty, nor did he claim it does. It simply makes the case that, insofar as you may find it convincing, dominant scientific theories are our best guess at what will happen. Therefore, it's rational to trust in them until the evidence shows otherwise. If all the other ideas you have at your disposal are wrong, bar one, you know the other theories have been disproven, you have one that hasn't been disproven, well, that's the least wrong idea, you should trust that. If you asked a bunch of physicists to take bets on which area of physics would be unchanged in 100 years' time, they would almost certainly pick thermodynamics. There are all sorts of fringe theories about gravity, time, and space, you name it. Some of these are made by credible scientists and are at least given due consideration, albeit ultimately being dismissed for the time being. But thermodynamics? Entropy? Hardly a soul doubts it. To question the validity of entropy or thermodynamics is equivalent to believing in perpetual motion machines. No one has ever made one, which in itself is basically equivalent to believing in magic. In fact, the idea of entropy is so pervasive that it even persists quite often in science fiction as a hard fact of reality. This genre, whose raison d'etre is, among other things, to consider the implications of tweaks to the rules of our reality, rarely questions the inevitability of entropy's reach. One of my favorite examples of this is The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. It's the story of an AI over eons trying to solve the problem of entropy, trying not to succumb to the inevitable chaos that the laws of reality dictate upon us. Thermodynamics is the study of the flow of energy, specifically heat, temperature, work, entropy, and other physical properties. It's the field of physics that explains why a hot cup of tea will eventually cool down to room temperature rather than heating up further. It's the field of physics that allows us to calculate how efficient an engine is. And it's also the field of physics which tells us how the universe is going to end. When I sat down with my supervisor in the third year of my physics undergrad, he joked to me that he had to be careful when teaching thermodynamics, since it was inherently depressing. When asking him to clarify, he said that to study the history of thermodynamics was to realize that many of its founders committed suicide. The implication being that their discoveries in the field had shaped how they view the world to such a degree that they decided to just opt out. He was a funny guy. I later found out that this is a joke often repeated in lectures and textbooks. While there is a sort of element of truth to this joke, it is misleading, if only for the fact that the vast majority of physicists learn about thermodynamics and do not immediately become suicidal, I think. However, I think it works as a joke because equally, to my knowledge, there are a few who learn about thermodynamics who describe it as optimistic. This is primarily due to the second law of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics has 4 laws, numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, as the 0th law was added later, but it's the second one that has the legendary status. It can be articulated a bunch of different ways, but the most basic way is, arguably, heat flows spontaneously from hot regions of matter to cold regions of matter. That's it. Heat spreads. It doesn't coalesce or collect up together in itself, it goes to where it is not. Heat up one end of a spoon, and eventually the other side will be hot as well. Put a fire on in a cold room, and the fire will generously and lavishly radiate its heat to the furnishings and people inside, rather than suck up what heat remains. In other words, heat is a communist sympathizer. It wants to evenly distribute itself everywhere. It is from this simple law, this empirical observation that everyone is intuitively privy to, that the pessimism arises. Energy and heat tend to only be useful when they're densely packed, when they're ordered. Pretty much everything interesting happens when we take energy or heat that's ordered and distribute it, from fire to sunlight to life itself. Energy that is unevenly distributed can be used to do useful things, and useful things almost inevitably even out the distribution of energy. To repeat, almost every conceivable action is a mechanism by which energy is redistributing itself from concentrated, useful places to spread itself out evenly. Life is only possible because of the uneven distribution of energy in our universe. Life is a process by which ordered energy becomes disordered. There is a finite amount of useful or concentrated or ordered energy. Of course, energy itself is conserved, but eventually, as interesting things happen and processes occur, it becomes evenly distributed, rendering it unusable to perform further work or sustain life. This is how things end. This is the heat death of the universe, a time whereby all matter has the same amount of energy. There will be no Ragnarok, the dead will not walk, there will be no crescendo. The universe will instead go quietly. It will eventually reach a state where, as it expands, all energy is uniformly distributed. By this time, no other chemical or reactive processes can occur, because there aren't going to be any energy gradients. There's going to be no life, no light, nothing of interest. It will be a dark, quiet, and lonely place. Some things to note here. This is not the only prediction as to what the ultimate fate of the universe will be, but it is currently the most widely accepted. Further, if this does come to pass, it will of course happen an unfathomably long time from now. Still, it is the best theory we have currently, and it's where we should place our bets. The other way of writing the second law, which you've probably seen or heard of, is, in a closed system, the total entropy always increases or remains constant. The pop science quip about entropy is that it's the measure of disorder in a system, and from this we can therefore rewrite the second law as, in a closed system, the total amount of disorder always increases or remains constant, which is to say, things inevitably, eventually, and unavoidably descend into chaos. It's worth briefly mentioning this definition of entropy as a measure of disorder is not false per se, but it's not the whole truth either. Entropy can be defined in a bunch of different, overlapping and complementary ways mathematically. From the classical definition, whereby entropy is all about the randomness in a system resulting from the reversible or irreversible transfer of heat, which I've been talking about, to the information theory definition, whereby entropy is all about predictability. The thing is, regardless of your flavor of entropy, one thing is clear. If you fast forward the clocks far enough, what logically follows from the second law of thermodynamics, plus some cosmological observations about the universe, is the heat death of the universe. Also, it's important to mention there's another kind of science-skeptical induction argument. This one is called the pessimistic meta-induction argument. This is different from the problem of induction in that the pessimistic meta-induction argument leverages inductive logic. It actively uses it. This argument goes, every previously held scientific idea or paradigm has been, at some point, proven false before we arrived at the current idea. There is nothing special about the current idea other than it is the current one. Therefore, at some point, it is likely that our current ideas will eventually be shown to be false. Therefore, should we trust it? This is, of course, a good observation. The cemetery of science is full of dead ideas. Further, most scientists agree that the current collection of best theories about the universe are incomplete and therefore wrong in a sense. That being said, this is not a good reason to dismiss them. We can understand easily why by moving away from this very binary understanding of truth. We could ask, was Newton wrong about gravity? And the answer is kind of, right? His mechanics break down at high speeds, and he doesn't account for time dilation or space stretching or any other relativistic effects. But his theory certainly wasn't outright false either. Newtonian mechanics describe almost every type of motion we're likely to experience on Earth. The theory that supersedes Einstein's theories will likely show that Einstein was wrong in some capacity, but he was right in a lot of ways. Science iterates. It doesn't claim absolute truth, just the best so far. I feel like it's very easy to breeze over the profundity of what we currently believe the end of the universe will be. Heat death is contrary to so many stories that religions and mythological traditions have told us about how things will end. It's almost the most anti-life story you could imagine. An anti-crescendo, the slowest possible, gratuitously empty end. The Big Bang is often leveraged by religious folks to argue that their holy scripture was right all along. But the heat death of the universe? To my mind, this should be up there with evolution and the heliocentric theory as grand displacements of religious doctrine by science. I felt so vindicated when, in her brilliant book Why Fish Don't Exist, which I cannot recommend highly enough, Lulu Miller illustrates the tragedy of entropy by opening it with, "Picture the person you love the most. Picture them sitting on a couch, eating cereal, ranting about something totally charming, like how it bothers them when people sign their emails with a single initial instead of taking those 4 extra keystrokes to just finish the job. Chaos will get them. Chaos will crack them from the outside, with a falling branch, a speeding car, a bullet, or unravel them from the inside, with the mutiny of their very own cells. Chaos will rot your plants, and it will kill your dog, and rust your bike. It will decay your most precious memories, topple your favorite cities, wreck any sanctuary you can ever build. It's not if, it's when. Chaos is the only sure thing in this world, the master that rules us all. My scientist father taught me early that there is no escaping the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy is only growing. It can never be diminished, no matter what we do." Much of her book is about how she personally wrestled with this problem. The solution I found for myself was in fact the problem of induction itself. I have occasionally been despondent about the conclusions of thermodynamics, like many have. The idea that decay is inevitable on a cosmic scale, that order is a temporary, fleeting state, that disorder and chaos are the norm, that not only are we each Sisyphus pushing eternal boulders up a hill, we are in fact decaying pushers. The boulder, with each push of the rock up the mountainside, it wears us down a little bit further until perhaps only the rock remains. This despondency has sometimes wormed its way into other forms of deterministic nihilism for me. I am a determinist. I think the future is written, that things are fated. But at some point in my life, I realized I could not be certain of this. It struck me that these two thoughts were mutually exclusive. The dead-end certainty of the heat death of the universe and the problem of induction, or, if you're a Popperian, the inherent limited certainty in scientific predictions. Before Einstein came along, gravity was a force. Everyone felt their weight on the ground. And then his theory emerged, and skydivers remarked that they could not feel their weight in free fall. For now, the future is bound, set. It feels that way to me. But perhaps one day it won't. Whether it's a cosmic black swan, a theory of everything, or a step change brought about by the 80th chess move, the future is an undiscovered territory. We have our inklings, but there is possibility within mystery. Let me try and put it another way. Have you ever had a thing happen to you in your life and thought to yourself, oh, this is really it. This is how the story is written. This could equally occur during a tragedy or a triumph, a success, an accident, a happenstance meeting, and so on. This could be a narrative you tell yourself about the inevitability of failure, the fairness or unfairness of the universe, and so on. We as humans, we're storytellers, and it's natural to abstract and try and infer universal laws from what we see, even on a human scale. My propensity has generally been to try and create negative stories, and these have been generally reinforced by what I had learned about thermodynamics. I took it as concrete evidence that my emotional disposition was right. After all, I wasn't imagining that things inevitably decayed. This was built into how the universe worked. But the problem of induction, it reminds me that there cannot be certainty. That even with the best tools available to me, there is still a sliver of doubt. If I'm being honest and genuinely aligning myself with the truth, which the dark whispers of my more melancholic moods always purport to be in alliance with, the truth is we don't know. We don't know what will happen. We have guesses, sure, but to act as if there's no space for anything else is simply false. It's bad science. We have our bets, we have our theories, we have our explanations, but the experiment hasn't yet been run. There's much we don't know, and who knows how much we don't know. And in that space that the problem of induction frees up, I feel like I gain back some agency. Not even necessarily hope, per se, but curiosity, maybe. I have to admit to myself that I don't know how the story will end, that none of us do. This isn't to say that the heat death of the universe won't come to pass, or that there is a way to reverse entropy, or that any of the predictions I've talked about here in this piece aren't correct. They may well be. They probably are. I'm simply trying to point out that even with the most reliable pillar of physics, certainties, absolute certainties, do not exist. So what good is the narrative I'm telling myself about my life, or the inevitability of history, or anything else? The fact of the matter is this: the future is not logically guaranteed to resemble the past. And that is why induction for me isn't a problem. It's kind of a blessing. I suppose you could take this the other way, though, if there are no absolute certainties provided by science or any other method. That leaves the space for a lot of bad things. Let's not talk about that.